Thank you everybody for showing up at whatever time it is. I'm Duchess Thyra Eiriksdottir from the East Kingdom, and I'm a Laurel in calligraphy and dance. And so that's why I've decided that even though it is somewhat strange to be teaching calligraphy through the internet with a camera, we're going to have a go at it. I have not actually tried it this way before, and so I can't imagine that anything will explode or that anyone will die, so it'll be fine. And hopefully you've had a chance to look at the handouts. So that will give us both some background, and also the exemplar that we're going to be using to start the class is the first picture in the PDF of images. So if you don't have that, I can actually share that on the screen. Probably, well, I can share it on the screen, except that I'm then going to be turning my webcam on and showing you live what I'm drawing. So if you don't have the exemplar handy, you can go ahead and watch what I'm drawing on the screen and imitate that, and then check the exemplar later. So sharing the link to it. Is that something the moderator can do?
Yes.
Okay, then I'll keep talking and I'll let you share the link in the chat. Thank you. The reason that I chose the Bâtarde hand is because it's my favorite, and that seemed good reason enough. It is a common hand throughout much of Europe in the 1400s. It was around for at least 100 years, often overlapping with some of the very fussy Gothic hands that are lovely and also very slow and painful to do. I love those as well, but the Bâtarde was meant to be a little bit quicker and easier to execute than the Gothic hands. But of course, in the way of all calligraphers, then once people made it easier, then they decided to show off how good they are by making it harder again. And so you will see a whole variety of Bâtarde styles. Bâtarde actually does mean that it is a bastard hand, in the sense that it is a combination of the stuffy Gothic upright scripts and also some cursive types. And so any script that has characteristics of both is known as a bastard hand. So bastard secretary in England, Bâtarde in France, bastarda in Spain, and I forget what the Italian is, but they were often using chancery and then their humanistic hands as well. So they might not have had their own term for this. And it's generally characterized by sort of a narrow letter shapes and sort of a spiky look to it. And like I said, some of them are executed sort of in a very rapid sort of cursive-like hand, and some of them are rather more formal and fancy. And I don't want to go through all of the stuff in the handout because I would like to have a chance to maybe make our way all the way through the alphabet, trying things out. Certainly, if you have questions about it, if you're having trouble getting at the handout, or if the handout doesn't make sense, I essentially pulled together a bunch of quotes or small snippets from my resources here. I decided that I didn't need to rewrite what people had already said, and so I've just collected a bunch of factual snippets in there. If you have your calligraphy materials on hand, the important details that you will need to know is the hand is about 4 to 5 nib widths high. So you'll want your minimum line to be anywhere between 4 to 5 times the width of your nib. And then the spacing between the lines is either that same volume again, or 2 of those, so 2 spaces to 1 of text. So I'm going to switch over to my view of my paper here, and I am writing on a slanted desk. And I find that some of the spiky letters are easier for me to execute on a slanted board, and you'll see why as we get into it. So here's my paper. Just get this, there we go. So hopefully that one will stay. If you need to, you can pin the video so that it stays on there, but it should, as long as I'm talking, it should stay on that video. But please do let me know if people, especially on mobile, if you lose track of where the screen is. I will admit that with the lighting that I have, it is very difficult to see my pencil lines because I'm using a very hard pencil. After we get going a little bit, when I switch to another page, I might line it in pen so that you can see more easily how the letters relate.
It's a little
Sorry?
I can see the pencil lines. It's a little bit out of focus, but the showing up nicely.
Thank you. Thanks for the feedback. Yeah, the fuzziness is going to be a frustration. My camera has very good resolution when I'm using other applications, and then Zoom just doesn't want to give me enough resolution. So maybe at the next Known World Herald and Scribes, we'll have more bandwidth or something.
Oh, there we go.
Yes. So here's my pen. So I am going to be writing with a Pilot pen, and it is the 3.8 millimeter size, so it'll be nice and big for everyone. You should probably be writing with a narrower nib because it is rather difficult to manipulate the pen when it's at a wide width, but it is good for practice. All right, so my surface is, I don't know if I can show this. So this is horizontal, and so it is tilted at a fairly steep angle. I would say probably definitely more than 45 degrees. I have found that if you don't have a nice writing desk, if you have sort of a larger writing board of some sort, you can prop it in your lap and lean it up against the table in front of you. And if it's long enough, it will stick up to be a writing surface up above table height for you. So that's one hack. You can also lean up a stack of books on the table and put your board against that, as long as you have something to keep the board from sliding around. It is not strictly necessary, and if you're doing this on your kitchen table, that's fine. The pen angle, I would say, is whatever it needs to be. Bâtarde happens to be a hand that has a lot of pen movement in it, so we'll get into that. So let me give you an O and an I so that you can start practicing while I talk some more about the particular details of the hand. And this is where we find out whether I can execute a nice O on demand. So we're going to start, and the O is made from 2 strokes, as most O's are. And it's very pointy. You know, you've got these sharp corners at the top and the bottom. And it's reasonably narrow. It's not super narrow like a Gothic would be, but it's definitely not round. It's definitely oval. And then our I, in a very basic sense, simply comes down, it cooks over a little bit and comes up. All right. Is it reversed? It looks reversed in my screen.
No,
so
it's fine.
It's fine. Okay. Thank you. So go ahead and practice if you are so inclined while I talk about some of the details. So the hand, actually while I'm talking a little bit, this is my printout of the exemplar that is in the handout. And to me, it feels like there's a fair bit of swoop in a lot of these letters. So, you know, the D, the B, and the tall letters all have loops at the top. The G is definitely very swoopy. And I find that often tends to incline people towards making the lines curved. And very often Bâtarde hands have a lot of straightness to them. There's not a lot of bend in them. And so one of the ways to make it look tidy while also being flowy is to make sure that, you know, your eye, and yes, this pen ink is going to smudge a bit, and I'm sorry for that. Your eye has some swoop coming in and going out of it, but the vast majority of the eye is very straight. So it is not sort of a curvy, wiggly sort of letter. And I don't know whether I can zoom in on that with the way I've got everything set up. Yes, I can. All right. Let's see how that goes. So this is too curved. This one is correct. All right. And, oh, there's a question. Yes, thank you for answering the Pilot Parallel. And I happen to be using, yes, like I said, I am using the 3.8 millimeter pen currently. And with the 3.8 millimeter, my lines are 15 millimeters apart. So these letters are 15 millimeters high for a 3.8 millimeter pen. If I was using sort of a standard nib size for making a scroll, I would probably be using a Mitchell 4, something in the 1 to 1.5 millimeter size. And then I would probably, for my own sanity, just do a 5 centimeter lines. And that would be probably approximately enough. I'll talk a little bit more about pen width in a moment, but I'll give you some more letters in the meantime. So oops, I'm gonna need to, you can't see this ridiculous setup that I have for the camera, but I assure you that sometimes there are situations where my pen cannot fit between the camera and the surface, so bear with me. So we're going to do the M and N and then the L. So if we also, let me just make one quick thing. I'll talk more about this later, but if you are looking at the exemplar that we are working from, that first image of the PDF, then this is a master who is showing off in a book, demonstrating all of his skills. So these are particularly fancy letters. And so we're going to be taking the shapes from them. But if you're having any trouble with all of the fiddly bits in the feet of the letters, that's quite all right. I'm not going to be able to execute them perfectly myself either. So if we want to look at an N, we will come up into it. We'll be sort of sharp at the top. We'll come down and make a little diamond foot. And then we'll come up. And then often Bâtarde hands have a little sort of hat on the end. Rather than making it a smooth curve into the N, you come out and then you back up and come down to make the N. And again, this portion of the N from here to here, it should be straight. I think mine bends a little bit in, but this should be straight and it should only curve a little bit at the end. So things we are not doing, oops, we are not just coming all the way over like a round humanist hand. And then we are not wiggling the base of the letter. We are coming straight down and giving a little hook at the end. So I'm also going to do an M, sort of the same fashion. Come up, come down. If you want to make the foot be a little fancy. And then we do that little hat out to the side. I don't know what the technical term is. And then come straight down and hook over. Okay. And I am trying to pay very special attention to the white space in between the legs of the M and trying to make sure that those are equal. And you can see that the middle stroke of my M does have a little bit of a bend to it. I am not sure what the 5 millimeter lines we're referring to, but the lines that I have right now, here to here, is 15 millimeters, so 1.5 centimeters. So I am drawing this very large in the hopes that it'll be easier for everyone to see. So we're going to do one more letter before I chat a little bit and give you some more background information. And you can go ahead and continue to practice as I do that. So the L should extend for this hand. I measured sort of from, you know, the height of the minim, which is basically the height of your O or any of your sort of short letters, was 15 millimeters in this printout. That is not the original hand. That is the size that my printer printed these particular letters. So they're 15 millimeters high. And then the ascender part of the letters was about 7 to 9 millimeters. So it's essentially 50% taller than the minimum height. And then the descenders, so any of the letters that stick down below the line, those went down about 9 to 10 millimeters. So that's about 2/3 of the minimum height. So in this particular hand, the descender actually goes down a little further, and the ascender is not super tall. If you are reproducing a text that has a slightly different version, like I said, the Bâtarde hands are extremely varied. So you might want to take a look at the proportions of your letter to make sure that your ascenders are going high enough or not too high, and that your descenders are going low enough. So yes, and the handout also has a link further up the chat if you can find that. Yes, and there's the smudging all over the place, and that is just going to happen. I do not use these pens for making scrolls because it seems like the ink takes forever to dry, but they are extremely convenient, and I don't have to redip my pen to make them work for this class. So to do an L, we're going to start. That's actually a little too high. I'm above halfway to the next line, so I'm going to move it down a little bit. So we start coming with just a little bit of stroke along the narrow direction, and we are going to come straight down if we can. We're going to put a little fancy foot on the bottom, and then we will come back up. We will just connect the left corner of my pen to where the broad stroke starts, and we're just going to pull this over and down, and then drag it along the narrow angle. So if you weren't expecting a technical, practical how-to class, well, that's what you're getting. So I'm going to do that again just for reference. That one didn't come out as well. You can see that their L actually comes out a bit further, I think. So you can see that this width is a little broader. So if I was practicing, I'll do one more. Come down. Sorry about the beeping noises in the background. If you can hear them, I'll turn that off in a moment. So,
And use the corner of the nib for some strokes.
There's going to be a lot of pen tilting. I do need to use the corner of the nib for some things. For this particular stroke here, I am not using the corner. I am actually pulling along the narrow dimension of the pen in this fashion. I certainly might, I'm being sort of quick about it, and so sometimes there is a bit of a drag as I pick the pen nib up, and the corner tails along the page and makes it a very thin tailing point at the end. But so far I have not been using the corner of the pen. Certainly if I wanted something like, if you look at the exemplar I here, if I wanted to have those very hairline extended trailing bits to be very fancy, I would probably not try to draw them initially. I would probably draw the primary part of the letter, and then I might go back if my pen will cooperate and use just the corner to extend the lines. I find often that if I am using a dip pen, that operation really depends on whether my nib cooperates or not. And the parallel pens, actually, the corners work quite well. Metal nibs, maybe, maybe not. Sometimes it depends on what ink I'm using and what surface. If you're using a quill, it actually works much better than with a metal nib. So if you can't get that sharpness with the corner of your nib, go back with a crow quill or a micron pen to get the look.
With the eye on that, the memo that you have, it has kind of like a little dip at the top. How would you do that?
Oh, these little horns at the top? Mm-hmm. Sure. Like I said, this guy was really showing off, and I did practice those because I knew someone would ask. Let's see if I can do it. So the other thing I would like to point out is that I'm not really sure how he did it. And so my general rule is that if you can do it the way they did, it's probably going to give you the best results. If you can't, just make it look good. So this one is probably, you come up, you make the little horns, and then you come back down into the black area and extend it down. Right? I've exaggerated a little bit and also slowed it down. So to do that again, I would come up, sort of make those bits. Oops, that got all blobby at the end. You can see that, if you can see, if it's not too fuzzy, I've got a little divot sort of right up here, and I would definitely go back and just fill that in with my pen to make it look nice and tidy. So these are mostly the feet and the pointy bits at the top are all variations on sort of the Gothic foot, the diagonal, the diamond basically. So if I was doing a Gothic letter, you know, often I would do a diamond at the top and I would come down and I would do another diamond at the bottom, right? So if you've ever done any Gothic, that should be familiar. If it's not, don't worry about it. You don't have to execute that in this class. So they are essentially making a fancier, swoopier diamond at the top and then coming down and making the rest of it, right? And same thing if I was doing, you know, I've got some little half diamondy-ish foots down here on the L, but you can see with his exemplar, the foot of his L really goes nuts. So, and to do that, which didn't come out perfect, but it's sort of close to what he has. I was rocking the pen back and forth to try to create the shape that I wanted without picking up the pen and putting it back down again. So, all right. Just checking my notes. We've got all the questions sorted out. Good. All right, the other thing that I would like to point out before we get into the other tall letters is this hand is very upright. And what I mean by that is that, so like for the O, or certainly for the M and the N, it's easy to see with the M and the N that the strokes are very vertical. This does not have an italic lean to it, even though it's sort of a cursive hand, or it might be written quickly. The intent is for the lines to go straight up and down. Same thing with the curvy letters, even though this is formed of two curves, it looks balanced. It looks like if you created that O from, you know, a block of wood or something, it would, I mean, it would tip over like an egg, but it's not overly balanced one way or the other. The top point and the bottom point are lined up right over top of each other. You can also see, we're going to get into the F and the S soon. Even though they have this sort of long tail going on, and even though they've got sort of a swoopy look to them, these in particular are actually quite vertical. And so if you execute them in a sort of more modern, whoops, pen, operate, fashion, right? Here's a vertical line. If you tilt it a little bit, it won't look like the exemplar. Does that mean it's wrong? Not necessarily. Other Bâtarde hands might tilt a little bit, but just be careful when you are looking at your exemplar and check, are the long letters actually vertical, or do they tilt a little bit? Sorry, I'm gonna close this so it'll stop chatting at us. There. Sorry for that. Okay, I've got one more line of space down here. So let us do the E and the C, and then we will talk a little bit more about some of the other letters. So the way we break down the E and the C is essentially we start with the same curve as with the O. It's almost identical. So, and they're very narrow letters. So we're going to come around as if we were going to make an O. And I find that if I want to make very pointy round letters, it really does help to draw the first line, come down to that point, and then bring my pen up along the narrow direction, just to really get that point going there. It is much easier to create a nice sharp point if you are doing it in one stroke, and instead of trying to connect and make that point happen with the second stroke. So then if I was doing a C, I would come back up here. I might stick the right corner of my pen a little bit above the line to give me that, that sharp point sticking up at the top. And then I'll draw it down a little bit. So we'll just come down this way, okay? And their C, you know, might have a bit of an extra curvy bit at the end. Again, if you are trying to show off. And if I'm doing an E, it's almost the same operation. So we come down, come back up, reset at the top, come out, and then along the narrow edge of the pen. Okay. So a note about angle. One of the references that I use a lot is David Harris. He says that it should be, the pen should be at a 30-degree angle for these hands. And I can't say that he's wrong in the sense that Bâtarde hands tend to have every angle in them. So here's an example of how I would sort of approximate a 30-degree angle. I feel like that is too shallow for making some of these letters. If I try to make an O with that 30-degree angle, to make the points sharp, that's a lot wider than I would like it to be. So I feel like often Bâtarde hands are done at a more of a 45-degree angle, something sharper. But definitely at some times you'll turn the pen so that it's flatter. Definitely sometimes it turns upward to be a little sharper. So don't worry too much about the pen angle and worry more about what the letter shape is coming out to be. So don't be beholden to the angle. If you have it at one angle and it's just not coming out right, try playing around with the angle and see if that makes making the letter easier. All right, so I'm going to let you practice E's and C's while I take just a quick spin through the alphabet before we get to the next letters. So let me make sure that everyone can see it on the screen. So the first several letters are all relatively normal. The D is a bit of an exception. You can see that they've gone a little nuts with the stroke of the D. This one is not vertical in the least. They're delightful. They come in many forms. The D often is the letter that is varied in Bâtarde hands. So you'll see lots of different variations. And in fact, if you look at the second page of the exemplar, you will see that most of the D's in the texts there don't have this extra loop at the top, mostly because they weren't showing off. They were trying to get a page of text written, and this loop just adds a lot of time. So often the D will look like this. Oops, the shadow doesn't help. And it'll just stick out to the side and not have the loop curving around. All right. H looks like an H. I, we luck out and we get a K here. We don't always get a K. L, M, N, O we've already looked at. The Q does not have any curve at the bottom. It just comes straight down. The P looks normal. Here we have two R's actually. Some of you may be familiar with this, but if you aren't, this is a sort of standard R. You would use it most of the time. And this R, I wish I knew what the technical term was, but this R is only used when it is attached to a bold letter. So an O, a B, or a P. And we'll see that. We'll practice that in a bit. But so just know that this little two-shaped squiggle is an R. Here's our long S. It's distinguished from the F by not having a crossbar all the way through it. And again, if you look at the handout, the pages of text on the third page, the long S's don't even have this little hook. The little hook is decorative. So, yep.
Half hour also work after an H.
You would think so, and I have never seen it. Not in Bâtarde, not in other hands. I have never seen it. They don't consider, despite the H having a nice curve to it, they do not consider it to be a bold letter. They don't do it in Gothic, where sometimes you will have this shape of an R, and it will come off of an O or a B or a P, and those letters are square. They're rectangular. There's nothing curvy in there. But those are the only letters, B, O, and P, that get to have the R sticking off of it. You might also think that the D is awfully bowl-like in this hand. Doesn't get it. The D gets something else, and we'll get into that in a bit. But it doesn't get the R. I don't make the rules.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Not a problem.
The P and the Q, they don't just come straight down. They're tapered, and this is of particular difficulty to me, so I wanted to point it out.
Yes, yes, we're getting there.
Okay.
Yep.
You just kind of went past them, and so.
Yeah. I was easing into that because that's not easy. But I promise it's such a distinctive thing, and it's with the F and the S as well. And we will get into how to practice that and how to do it. So fear not. All right, just to quickly finish up, this letter afterwards, after the long S, is also an S. This one is used only at the end of words. I usually call it the terminal S. And yes, it is a very strange curled shape. It doesn't curve, one way and then the other. All of the curves sort of go in one direction, and it looks sort of like a B. But that's an S. Then we have a T, which is fairly standard with the smudge, sorry. U, and then this is French, and they are writing mostly in Latin. And so there is no V and there is no W in this hand. You would have to make it up. This letter, where are we? Down here. This is the X. If you are looking at a manuscript, very often this hairline cross of the X sometimes fades in the manuscript, and it will look honestly like a V. And if you want to go ahead and make your V's look like that, they'll fit right into the manuscript. But very often, if you see that in Bâtarde, it is an X. The Y's are one of my particular favorites. There is a reason why I put a Y in my first name, so that I could draw Y's an awful lot. This is a Z. You don't always get a Z in every hand, but you do in French, which is great. We have some dots here to fill up the spaces, sort of as punctuation. And I asked my paleography friend what these other symbols are. This one, we're not sure. Could be many things. There's not enough context to know. This one, which looks like a Z, is actually the ampersand. And if anyone has heard of Tyronian notes, this is a variation on that 7-shaped et and ampersand symbol. If you don't know Tyronian notes, Tyronian notes, Google it, and you'll find some interesting stuff there. And this last thing is basically a C with a line, a fancy line drawn through the top bit. And that is for con, C-O-N. And that word is just really common. It's sort of like the, it doesn't mean the, but you know how many thes there are in English. Sometimes they would make a shorthand for small words that show up a lot. And so this one is C-O-N in this case. All right, so we'll put that aside for a little bit and we'll get back to some practical stuff. And I'm gonna shift this page over. Actually, I'm gonna get a new page, otherwise I'm gonna smear this all over my hand. Now is a good time for questions, if anyone has any. All right. No questions? Must mean that everyone understands everything all the time. Excellent. Good job. Okay. I was going to do a few of the other letters, but since the spiky letters have been brought up, let's just get to it. Let's get that out of the way. So the thing about spiky letters, number one, get it done any way you can, right? When you're starting, if you want to do this for a scroll, you know, if it suits you to stick the pen totally vertically and sort of draw your backbone, if it'll cooperate, you know, and then sort of fill it in. I don't do it this way, so it might not come out very good, but, you know, if you want to sort of build it up from small strokes so that you get there, good enough, right? But certainly there are better, faster ways to get it done. Technically the correct way to do it, and I'm not going to draw the P or the Q, I'm just going to focus on the spike for a little while, is you rotate the pen. And so I don't know how well you can see the motion when I'm actually doing it, so I'll just demonstrate a little bit. So I am holding, the pen is resting against this bottom knuckle of my finger. I'm resting it on my middle finger, and I'm holding it loosely between thumb and forefinger. And so what's going to happen is that as I'm moving my arm down, I'm going to be rotating the pen with my thumb and forefinger. Okay. Now, a mistake people commonly make, and one of so almost the entire reason that I insist on doing this on a vertical, it's not vertical surface, but on a very slanted surface, is because it makes it easier to pull the pen down straight. Gravity helps. And not in the sense, like a pen is not very heavy, it's not helping in that way, but my proprioception, my sense of where my arm is helped by knowing which direction is down, rather than drawing it across a flat horizontal. The other thing is that if you try to twist the pen and curl your fingers at the same time, so I'm moving my fingertips closer to my hand, to my palm, while I try to rotate it, I'm going to have all sorts of trouble potentially with trying to keep the nib on the paper. But I can sort of do it. You know, it's an option. Part of the problem then becomes you're going so slowly that the ink might pool on your page. You could get some difficulty in sort of ink management if you go too slow. If that works for you, great, go ahead and do it. Rotate the pen and tuck your fingers in. But what I'm going to recommend is that you rotate your fingers and the pulling motion originates from your shoulder. So I'm not moving my shoulder. I'm sorry, I can't easily, well, actually, let me switch the screen back real quick just to talk about biomechanics for a sec. I didn't think that was going to be part of this class, did you? All right. So when I'm executing this, I'm not pulling my shoulder this way, but what I am doing is sort of pulling my elbow down. And so I'm sort of using everything from the tip of the nib all the way through my hand. I'm trying to keep the position of my fingers still as I do this, all the way down my arm, down those. I didn't do this just to show off the buttons, I swear, all the way down to my elbow. And so I am rotating from the shoulder, pulling that elbow down and trying to keep everything else still while I do that. And that allows me, you can't really see this easily, to rotate my fingers freely, rotate that pen with the points of my fingers while everything else stays still. And the motion comes from muscles way back here. Okay? They are nice buttons and I sewed them all myself. So that's the operation we're going for. Now, still easier said than done, I will admit. So another calligraphy laurel, Eleanor Catling, also from the East, teaches that the best way to learn how to do this is to draw a lot of these lines and start, don't worry about the letters, start by just drawing them as long as they need to be. So if you haven't gotten the hang of rolling the pen, you know, in a short distance, right? Just a letter's worth of roll, you might not get all the way through, right? You may have only gotten that narrow and it's still not the right height for what you want. Just practice the motion. Bring that down as long as it needs to go, just to practice. Oops. You also need to practice them not bending all over the place, admittedly. It helps if you're not talking while you're doing this. But so think about isolating the motion, pulling down with your elbow, keeping the pen on the paper. This definitely is easier to do with a narrow nib than a wide one. But if you want to learn it properly and to do it well, get yourself a wide nib and practice with a wide nib. It forces you to pay more attention to what you're doing. Okay. And you can see even I started off kind of wobbly. And then as I practice this, and don't worry, you know, this is all just practice. You are just drawing the lines, getting used to the feel of how the biomechanics works. And then eventually, once you've practiced a bunch, you should be able, as I botch it, to get the twist to happen in a shorter amount of time, because your fingers will all work together. You can see that this is still a little wiggly. If you actually look really carefully at the exemplar, the P is also a little wiggly, the backbone. The stroke is very straight and vertical. The edges are a little bit ragged, okay? So ideally, you don't have ragged edges and it's nice and perfectly vertical and the slope tapers down, you know, very nicely. I guarantee you will not do that the same way every time, at least not without a lot of practice. So that's what you're aiming for. Feel free to go back and sort of fill in, especially with a crow quill, if there's any particularly egregious bits. But that will at least get you the bulk of the stroke. Yes, and you can also just draw them in, which totally works. The other thing is that sometimes you can hide a multitude of sins when you do a P. You can come up and around, and then this crossbar has a nice little curve to it, right? And there's sort of the ideal amount of curve to match the exemplar. But if you've got a wiggly bit in your upright and you want to cover it over with that cross stroke, go for it. So, and that motion works for the P, the Q, the long S, and the F, all of them. But the long S and the F have an extra complication. So if you were using a quill pen, you may be able to produce, this one doesn't have it particularly exaggerated, but there's definitely some belly going on here. It's a little wider than just a pen width on the F and the S. And it certainly is fatter for longer of the stroke. So they're clearly not twisting the pen. Oops, sorry about that. They're clearly not twisting the pen right away on these letters. It stays wide for a while and then it twists. This is often done, like I said, with a quill pen, you might be able to do it with pressure. So if you push more on the quill pen, you can get the tines to split a little bit. And if it's just a tiny bit, the ink will span in between the two tines and you'll get a wide stroke, and then you lighten up on the pressure to make it narrow again, and then you twist to get the last of the pointy bit out of it. I don't practice with a quill pen often enough to do that myself. Go for it if you are so inclined. Those of us dealing with metal nibs, that doesn't work so well. You can press a metal nib to make it split a little bit, but it just doesn't work quite right, and that much pressure sometimes can damage your paper. So I don't recommend it. What I do recommend is two strokes. Very often, books will teach that you do the sort of standard twist here, which leaves you with too narrow of a stroke, and then either pushing back up from the bottom to make a second overlapping stroke that gives you the bowl. Or coming, oops, that one wasn't great, but that's okay. I'm coming back with another line. You can come back up to the top and sort of make the belly and bring it down into the stroke. Both of these work. They're often taught. There's nothing wrong with them, other than I find very often that it's very difficult to get the join to look good when I'm doing the bowl as a second stroke that way. If I do the vertical stroke first and then the belly stroke second, I often find that I come in too sharply or I overshoot, and so now I've got, I'll just demonstrate, you know, I'll come over here and I'll try to be twisting it and I'll cross over. And so now I've got this little itty bitty fishtail going on at the bottom here. And how on earth do I make that look like it's a nice sharp point? Anything I try to do to fix it, other than scraping off a little bit, is just going to make it worse. Sometimes you just have to learn to accept it. You can see, you know, I've got some serious variety going on here. This is not an easy technique, especially not with a wide nib. What I found that sometimes works better for me is to draw the belly first. The caveat is that you have to be really careful not to make it look like a big curve. That won't work. But you can start with the belly stroke, and that actually makes it easier to get into the pen twist because you're not coming down at a vertical stroke. You've got a little more wiggle room to come in sort of sideways. And then I can come back with a really vertical or almost vertical pen and draw in the back and get that nice and straight and vertical. I'm having some fuss up here with the pilot pen, but that's not usually a problem with a metal nib. And then we just make the top look right. Okay, I'll demonstrate that again in a moment once I finish this F. Here is another example where Bâtarde uses all kinds of pen angles. So I've done sort of a normal pen angle for this one, a really sharp one for this part, sort of a normal angle for that, and then you're going to want a fairly flat angle to do the crossbar. Sorry about this being in the way. You definitely don't want, you know, a 45-degree angle crossbar. That'll be too fat. So let's come down here and try that again while everyone's practicing. So my recommendation is to come up here and do our belly stroke. Come back. You can either go completely vertical and then fill it in, or you can sort of be at a bit of a sharp angle, bring it down, fill in that top bit so it doesn't look ugly, bring it up and over to make the hat. Very shallow angle, crossbar. It would really help if that was vertical. It kind of leans a little bit, but at least it's smooth. So there's that. There are many, many pieces to practice with these. Yes. So same thing works for the S. You just don't put the crossbar on. I'll do it one more time. And then in the interest of time, we're going to hustle along. Sorry about that. I lost track of the time. So other letters that are important. Let's do that funny S. Let's do the D, and let's do that connected R. All right. So the terminal S in this hand definitely is done by starting with sort of the backbone of an O or an E or a C. This part even looks kind of like I'm drawing a C or an E, still looks like an E, and then I come back around and I connect the two. This is a really common S in Bâtarde. So it's basically an E in this particular hand with a bowl at the bottom like a B. There are definitely some Bâtarde hands where I swear it does look like you actually draw an S and then you come back up and make it look like there was a continuous stroke from the top to the bottom. But in this hand, it's definitely the stroke first and then this B shape in the front. All right, the D, let's do that one quickly. So the D starts like an O as well. You'll notice that a lot of the letters in Bâtarde look like O's. You'll also notice that I am not being too fussy about hitting the lines in this hand. Other hands, I am very, very specific about making sure that my letters touch the bottom. The pointiness of the Bâtarde gives me a little bit of leeway in the sizing. So now I'm going to make my pen angle a little bit shallower to do the swoop of the D. I'm going to make sure one of the things that makes this D look good is it comes you start way out here, right? You're not lining up with the bowl of the D. You're moving out another half width of a letter and starting way out on the side. Whereas you'll notice the B and the H and the K, their swoops at the top mostly stay in line with the bowl size. The D is much bigger. So we're going to come out here, come down and around, and make sure we connect up. And then the loop bit is definitely done with a bit of a shallow pen angle. So this comes around and lines up. Whether you connect it or not is up to you. Sort of depends on the hand. But again, the D is definitely requiring, yeah, the top of the D, trying to make it not look like an 8, often really does matter on coming way out here so that it's not sort of rectangular, and then that shallow angle of the pen helps to make the proportions look right. All right, so let's demonstrate that funny R business. So here's an O, and so the R will connect up right up here on top, comes up, curves around, comes down, and out. And you can see, I'm often going back, I'm making this nice swoopy, confident stroke, and then I'm going back in and fixing the bits that didn't come out quite right. That's part of intermediate calligraphy, definitely. So any of those letters would, here I'll draw a B real quick. And then there's, oops, one more thing I wanted to point out before I wrap things up. So here's a B, very quick B. This comes, now this stroke doesn't really go out, it just comes, starts at the top and comes down at an angle and connects up with the top of the B. And then the R, okay? So that's how that R works if you haven't seen them before. The last thing I wanted to point out is this variation with the D that we see in this word here, where you can see that the E that is after the D basically overlaps, and that's called biting or backbiting, where the two letters share a piece of themselves. They overlap exactly. This is particularly a Gothic technique. When you have those picket fence things, very often a single vertical is the right hand of the previous letter and the left hand of the next letter. It doesn't work out quite as neatly when one is doing sort of more cursive letters, and this works just for D. It does not work for B and H and P, just D, and only with E and O. So if I were to do an O, I wouldn't even bother covering over this slightly poorly made D that I have here. I would just come down here to the bottom, finish the bottom of the O, make a little upstroke, and bring the O around. Okay, so that gives you that overlapped look, but you don't need to lay down double ink on that space. And
because there's only 2 minutes to the next one, so
yes,
people get out to whichever stream they want to get to.
Yep.
Is there just one last thing you'd like to say?
I think my contact information is on the handouts, so if you have any questions because we didn't get quite through all of the letters, feel free to send me a message or send me a picture if you want me to take a look and give some advice. And otherwise, enjoy the rest of your known world heralds and scribes, and I'll see you in some other classes.